So speaking about mental health and racial justice, just to set some context as we go into this evening conversation, I'm just aware that as a British society, we have only just beginning to talk about mental health. This has been a taboo in society for such a time, for a long while. But now we're talking about mental health issues. People are more open than ever before. But also, since the death of George Floyd, there's been more conversation and talk around racial injustice. There's been, I suppose before the death of George Floyd, somehow we kind of assume we are post-racial, but I think the death of George Floyd has kind of really punctured some reality for us that we need to still reflect and think around racial justice. And so we are having these two conversations, and at times it could feel like they are separate around mental health, around racial justice. But then within the church, I think mental health is still a taboo sometimes within the church. I think we can do more. Obviously, people are having some of the conversations around that within the church, but sometimes perhaps because of our theology, sometimes it's difficult to have this conversation. And there is also something in our British Christianity that is still not fully discussing or having conversation around racial justice. And so tonight is just to connect those two conversations around mental health concerns and to look at actually how does racial injustice, how does it impact on mental health issues? And this is not something just for the Black church, just to make that clear from the start. Because people might think, oh, Black and human, this is only a conversation for Black folks or people of color. But we feel very deeply that this is a conversation for the whole church, whether you lead a white church or you're part of a white church or a multi-ethnic church or different churches. This is something we feel it's very important that we have this conversation together tonight. And so tonight we have different people. We have mental health specialists. We have a Black theologian. We have Black theologians in the room who will be sharing. We have counselors. We have grief specialists who can be sharing on the panel, Titilola, who works with me. We also have bereavement support specialists in the person of Rev Cassius Francis. So we have people who have the expertise to share with us tonight. So I'm going to introduce the first speaker, who is Rachael Newham. Rachael works for Kintsugi Hope, and she leads the mental health friendly church. So over to you, Rachael, as you share about mental health.
Hi, it's really great to be here this evening. As Israel said, my name is Rachael Newham, and I run the mental health friendly church project at Kintsugi Hope, which means that my job title is the Mental Health Friendly Church Project Manager, which took me approximately a year to learn how to say, and I've just about got it, I think, in one now. And I'm just going to share my screen so that you can see what I'm talking about. So this is us, the mental health friendly church. And actually, what does that mean for the Black community, but also for the whole church community as we seek to be places of welcome and of sanctuary for all of God's people? And the statistics around mental health and the Black and minority ethnicity community are harrowing. And when we first came to do this mental health research, we knew that we had to be really clear-eyed in terms of what we were looking at. We couldn't shy away from the difficulties that being a Christian and having mental health and having mental illness brought up. And we feel the same about this evening, that we can't shy away from the difficulties and the heartbreaking statistics that arise. And I'm just going to run through these relatively quickly to give us a view from where we're standing, so that actually we have an idea that when we're talking about what mental health friendly church is, when we're talking about how we can best be a beacon, we know the darkness that we're looking into. We know the struggles that people are experiencing. And so particularly in terms of mental health, Black people are over 4 times more likely to be detained under the Mental Health Act than white people with the same conditions. They are 8 times more likely to be subject to a community treatment. They're 8 times more likely to be subject to a community treatment order, which can be very restrictive in terms of caring and living with mental illness. And Black women are more likely to experience common mental illnesses such as anxiety disorder or depression, even though mixed anxiety and depression is still the most common mental health issue in the country. Black women are still more likely to be experiencing it. And we can't have this conversation without having the conversation about the impact that racism has on the mental health of Black people. Exposure to racism increases the likelihood of experiencing mental health problems such as psychosis and depression. And people from the Black community face these additional disadvantages and struggles, which mean that they are more likely to struggle with their mental health, including experiencing poverty and homelessness. And the conversation around poverty and mental illness is growing and particularly prevalent at the moment. They're more likely to struggle in a school system that doesn't account for them, struggle with unemployment, be in contact with the criminal justice system, and face challenges accessing services. And this is because of stigma. This is because of stigma due to racism, but it's also because of the stigma of mental illness. And those twin realities of racial injustice and mental illness make life so much more difficult than it needs to be. And they're realities that we have to hold closely in mind when we're thinking about what being a mental health friendly church looks like in a world that feels less than friendly, both to those living with mental illnesses and those impacted by racism. And I love this quote from Cole Arthur Riley from her book, This Here Flesh. To be rooted is perhaps the most important and least recognized need of the human soul. And actually, when it comes both to racial injustice and to mental illness, that sense of being rooted, that sense of belonging, is what is so often lost and so often fractured by prejudicial systems. So what are we talking about when we talk about a mental health friendly church? Well, we interviewed, we had a qualitative survey of up to about 20 church leaders and 1,000 regular churchgoers did a quantitative survey. So they answered questions about what their experience of mental health and the church was, what their understanding was of that and of stigma. And perhaps the first thing that came up for us was the issue of language. Author Matt Haig says, we use depressed as a synonym for sad, which is fine, as we use starving as a synonym for hungry. But the difference between depression and sadness is the difference between genuine starvation and feeling a bit peckish. And that really encompasses the difficulty that talking about mental illness and mental health well, because we don't really know what we're talking about when we're talking about mental illness. Our language matters. It matters when it comes to race, and it matters when it comes to mental illness. And so what we found was that actually by looking at mental health in terms of a continuum, we're able to see the full picture of what mental health is. Because all too often when we talk about mental health, we're not just talking about mental health. We're talking about mental illness. We're talking about having a bad day. And this kind of diagram that I hope you can all see exposes, I guess, the breadth of what we're talking about when we're talking about mental health. At the top left hand of the quadrant, left hand as I'm looking at it, we have where maximum well-being and fitness meets severe diagnosis. This is somebody with a diagnosis of a severe mental illness who copes well and has positive mental health. And actually that's such an important place to start, because having a diagnosis of a serious mental illness does not mean that we cannot experience well-being. And then to the right of this, we have a person with no mental illness or disorder who has positive mental health. And let's face it, this is probably the section we'd all like to be. We don't have a diagnosable mental health problem and we're feeling pretty good. So that's great when it comes to us. And then in the bottom right-hand quadrant, we have where no diagnosis meets minimum mental well-being and fitness. This means that actually somebody isn't mentally ill, but they're also not doing very well. And so in this quadrant, we can have, it's a lot of people. People might be struggling with poverty, they might be grieving the loss of somebody. They might just be feeling really down in the dumps. And that doesn't mean they have a mental illness, but it does mean that they might need some extra care. And then to the left hand, we have where severe diagnosis meets minimum mental well-being. And perhaps this is what we would most naturally think of when we think of mental illness. Somebody who has a diagnosis and struggles to live the life that they would want to live. And so in having that language to talk about, I'm now going to share a little bit about what our research with Theos showed us when it comes to what a mental health friendly church can look like. We had this real kind of tale of two halves when it came to the research. We heard some really encouraging things, but we also heard some things that gave us great cause for challenge. So of the 1,000 regular churchgoers who answered the survey, 43% of respondents had experienced a mental health issue in their lifetime. Now, this is higher than the kind of oft-quoted 1 in 4 statistic, but actually that does make sense because you're probably more likely to do a survey around mental health if you have a personal interest in it. So, but it also might recognise that actually far more people are living and struggling with mental health issues than we might think they are. On the other hand, and this as somebody who's been working in the area of faith and mental health for kind of my whole working life, really gave me cause for encouragement that actually UK Christians overwhelmingly agreed that churches can help people experiencing mental health issues. There is such possibility within the church. And that possibility is not just because of us, and actually probably much less to do with us than we think. The possibility is because of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Moving on, despite that possibility, despite the gospel where the word becomes flesh, where Jesus as a human walked the earth, wept with grief at the death of his friend, where he turned water into wine at a wedding, which sounded pretty fun. What we found here was that only 35% of respondents felt supported by their church in regards to their mental health. This is a huge gap in the potential the church has to be a place of sanctuary and wholeness, and where actually it's falling short. And we're not seeing churches being safe and supportive spaces for people. Again, the flip side being that actually we have made some progress. The fact that we are having events about mental health, the fact that actually probably we can talk more about our mental health and use that language now more than ever before. And there's this, one of the key bits that came out of the research was that actually there was a strong consensus among respondents that mental health issues weren't caused by personal actions or sin, which means we've moved away from so much of the toxic teaching which said that actually if you're struggling with your mental health, it's because of something you specifically have done. We know that mental illness, that our struggles are an ultimate result of the fall. But that doesn't mean that we can reduce, certain situations into why some people develop mental illnesses and why others don't. There is so much possibility, and I'm probably going to use that word a lot this evening because I believe wholeheartedly in the Christian church. But I'm clear-eyed enough to see that actually we're not reaching that potential. Scripture talks about, well, Scripture doesn't talk in the language of mental health because that wasn't the point. Scripture isn't a mental health textbook, but it does talk about shalom and wholeness. and that meeting with Jesus, we can meet with his wholeness. Not that life will magically be okay, but that we will meet the person of Jesus Christ. Perhaps the most challenging and important bits from the research was the recognition of stigma, the stigma around mental illness that has kind of developed around negative lay theologies. And almost all of the church leaders that we interviewed believe mental health issues were stigmatized still in the UK church. And 74% of respondents of the more wider survey of the regular churchgoers agreed that mental health issues are still stigmatized within society. But these particular lay theologies, this idea comes from theologian and psychotherapist Marcia Webb, who talks about a lay theology being not something that's necessarily preached from the front of the pulpit, but something that emerges around the silence, some teachings that spring up through a lack of honest and clear-eyed conversation about mental illness, a lack of preaching and engagement with the Bible when it comes to mental illness. And the first of these is a lack of faith, which we kind of touched on just a minute ago. The belief that an individual developed a mental health challenge or illness purely because of a lack of faith. So often verses like Philippians 4 verse 6 are used here to talk about, do not be anxious about anything, but in every situation with prayer and petition, present your requests to God. This beautiful gem of a verse and scripture is used to shame people, to say, actually, you can't have faith and have an anxiety disorder. When actually, this teaching together in the rest of the Bible shows that anxiety is the first emotion seen in scripture when Adam and Eve hid. And Jesus experienced the ultimate anxiety through his sweat being tinged with blood in the Garden of Gethsemane. And he wasn't a man who lacked faith. Mental illness is not the result of a lack of faith. It's the result of a fallen world. The second is that actually people who struggle with mental illness are selfish, and it's about too much introspection and too much kind of dwelling on perhaps past problems. But this is rooted in the belief that actually a mental illness is inherently sinful. And that somehow by experiencing mental illness, we are not able to experience the joy of the Lord that is spoken about perhaps in Nehemiah. And that verse that we just have to be joyful, that's taken from Nehemiah, is actually comes in the context where Nehemiah is saying, we've done our grieving. Nehemiah himself spent a really long time weeping over the city. And he's now saying, now this is the time to feast. It wasn't a blanket instruction for the people of God not to grieve. And within Christian self-help literature, within Christian books, you'll find arguments that seem to suggest a believer's negative thoughts and attitudes may contribute to maybe the cause of their depression. But actually, mental illness isn't a choice. It's something that people carry, it's a burden people bear, and it's one that we must meet with compassion. The third is that mental illness is purely a result of personal sin. It is one of those beliefs that thankfully has receded slightly, that we've seen through the course of the research, but that actually we can date back specific sins that we might have perpetrated in our lives to the development of mental illness. But mental illness is so much more complex than that. It involves our biography, our biology, our trauma, all of these things that come together to create the development of mental illness. And lastly, is the issue of demons. And this is the belief that an individual's mental health issues or mental illness is purely down to negative spiritual forces. This stems from the biblical text where Jesus is talking about casting out demons, where the disciples are doing so, and particularly, for example, somebody like the man who is living with the demons, who Jesus casts into the pigs. The problem is we're not saying here that the principalities and powers of this world and of heaven aren't impacting on our mental and emotional health. But we are saying that they're not the only reason, and that they can't be the first thing we jump to. All too often, I have asthma and I have depression. I don't think I've ever been told that my asthma might be because I have a demon. But that conversation is had when we talk about mental illnesses. And so actually it's about viewing them on a more equal footing and recognizing the complexities of mental illness and the grace of God in our lives. And so much of these, many of these negative lay theologies, I think, lies in the fact that actually only 91% of the church leaders had had no training on mental health issues, either in their experience at Bible college or in terms of their continuing professional development. And considering that this is one of the leading issues of our time, this is a huge gap that needs to be filled. And actually, I think it's linked, isn't it, to the 56% of the 1,000 regular churchgoers who felt their church rarely or never spoke about mental health issues. And I expect it's a similar picture for issues of racism and the impacts of racial injustice in our churches. When our leaders don't feel equipped and don't have the training, they're going to have less confidence to talk about it. So we need to see a shift for our church leaders so that they are well equipped to have these conversations and that we're bringing them into the open in our church lives. So where do we go from here? What do we do about it? We pinpointed kind of three key things. The first being training. We want to see churches, church leaders, lay leaders, congregations trained on mental illness and the Bible has to say about mental health. That doesn't mean we want to give everyone a psychiatric degree. It doesn't mean that everybody needs to become an expert. But actually, we do want to have a working knowledge of what we're talking about when we talk about mental health. Courses such as Mental Health First Aid are brilliant at giving people a really balanced kind of basic beginning level of training. And we're developing our own, we've kind of just started to pilot a training that looks like how can we as the church help to support those who are struggling with mental illness? How can we become places that are friendly to those who are struggling? And that how can we become churches that actually mental health is spoken about openly and without stigma? Secondly, we feel really strongly that we have to name our position as the church on the stigma of mental health. We need to do it when it comes to racial injustice, and we need to do it when it comes to mental health. We need to be saying that actually becoming a Christian is not going to alleviate all our mental illnesses, but it does mean that we have the presence of God. And finally, this idea of the ministry of gentle presence came up again and again, particularly in our conversations with leaders. That idea that actually we aren't meant to be fixing people. We aren't meant to be making everything better for everybody. We aren't meant to be being doctors when people need doctors. But like Jesus walked alongside the heartbroken friends on the road to Emmaus, we are then able to walk alongside the people who are struggling, both with the impact of racial injustice, but also with mental health. And actually, these kind of 3 points are as relevant, I think, when it comes to racial injustice as they are with mental illness and mental health issues. We need to be talking about it. We need to be equipped to talk about it. And we need to be able to offer the gentle presence of Jesus to those who are struggling. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rachael, for sharing about that with us. Really lots of things to think about. So I'm sure people will have questions, which they can put to Rachael later, as she's going to be part of the panel. So please put your questions in the chat so that we can do that. We're going to have a quick comfort break, not long, just about 2 minutes. So if you just want to take a step off the screen and then just come back in the next 2 minutes, and then we're going to have Bishop Delroy Hall. Shermara is going to introduce Bishop Delroy Hall to us. So quick 2 minutes break as we pause and reflect on what Rachael has just shared. So if you want to grab water or something, now's the time to do so. Thanks.
Amazing. So we hope that you have enjoyed your 2-minute comfort break as we come back for our second half of Black and Human. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Delroy Hall, who is a trained psychotherapist, registered with the BACP, lifelong learner, academic, and independent scholar. Dr. Delroy's doctoral research examined the transatlantic slave trade and the impact and ongoing consequence on Black human life as gracious violence was used as a form of social control for 3 centuries. Bishop Delroy Powell is also the chaplain for Sheffield United Football Club as of September 2017, and he's the CEO of Dell's Consultancy, which offers online counselling, bespoke training, seminars, and webinar sessions. We are so privileged to have Dr. Delroy Hall with us this evening. Over to you, Dr. Delroy.
Good evening, Shermara and Bishop Mike and everyone else who can hear me. Thank you very much indeed. And Israel and people who I don't know, people I do know, thank you very much for taking the time out on a cold, wet, not quite winter, but cold evening. So I'll be talking about racial injustice and mental health. So let me just share, hopefully it won't be death by PowerPoint. Let me just have a quick look. Okay, just ooh, okay, what's up? Okay, right. That's right. So yeah, you'll see that, and you've seen that a few times already. So I really want to be discussing about the impact of racial injustice, and then towards the end I'll be looking at what we can do to help ourselves for people who have been impacted by racial injustice, and maybe how you can help a friend if you're not a person of color or Black or brown, but you might be able to help them in the terms of what you can actually do with them. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to points to consider, 2 stories and a poem. First story is a few years ago I was going to Jamaica on the flight, and I met a man going across there with his family, and he said every year he went to Jamaica for 6 weeks, and I asked him why, and he said the levels of stress and what he had to experience at work Jamaica, where he's from, was a place that he just went to chill, to relax and recharge his batteries. Never forgot that story. The picture of this guy here, Lenny James, some of you will know, is a Black British actor. And he was interviewed some time ago. There was a documentary about racism. And he said that he went to the Caribbean on holiday with his family. I think he was there for 2 months. And he said, when they were leaving the island, I think maybe in Antigua, but I'm not too sure. But when they were leaving the island, he said, when the pilot said, "We are now leaving Caribbean airspace," he said he just burst into tears. And his wife looked at him, not too sure what was going on. And then he settled. And then he said, when he got to Heathrow Airport, he said he felt his body tense up because he knew what he would be experiencing. He was going back into an environment where he wasn't really wanted. So I just wanted to share those two stories. And now I want to share a very, very short video just to illustrate a point. And I'll explain in a moment. Let's look.
To How to Play Jenga, presented by GatherTogetherGames.com. This video will cover how to play the game Jenga. The video will start with the general concepts and gameplay, and then get into more of the details for the game. Jenga is set up by building a vertical tower with the Jenga blocks. The tower is built by stacking 3 side-by-side blocks in each row. Each new row formed is turned 90 degrees from the blocks in the row below it. The object of the game is to be the last successful player to remove and stack a block before a player makes the tower fall. The player that built the tower is first to play. A turn consists of a player removing a block from the tower and placing the removed block on top of the tower. The player's turn ends 10 seconds after the block has been placed atop the tower or once the next player touches a block. Players continue to take turns removing and stacking blocks until the tower falls. The last player to successfully remove and stack a block without the tower falling wins the game. The player that caused the tower to fall has to set up the tower for the next game. A player can only touch blocks with one hand at a time. A block can only be removed from below the topmost completed level. That wraps up How to Play Jenga. If you found this video helpful, give it a thumbs up and get more game.
So you might be asking, what on earth are we doing looking at a game on Jenga? I remember some time ago doing something very similar to, we actually did it in person. It's a great game, Jenga. But what I liken it to is the blocks that are taken away from the main structure are those daily infractions that people experience on a regular basis. And what people do quite often, people of color, they just continue. But the more that they are being chipped away, the more that they themselves as a human structure is becoming weaker and weaker until if they don't get the necessary help, support and care, then they fall to pieces. They have health problems. And certainly today we're looking at mental health issues. It's quite interesting that that people who, I may say a little bit more later on, when people then go through a process of racial discrimination, that one of the things that happens to lots of people, they become unwell in the process because of the levels of stress. So just that game, as fun as it is, but for me it highlights the daily infractions. Some would call it microaggressions. Pierre Bourdieu call it symbolic violence, where you treat people in a particular way, in a subtle way, and so forth, that actually begins to take a toll on our personhood. So microaggressions, everyday verbal and non-verbal and environmental slights and snubs that lets people know and realize or make them feel that they're not really kind of belonging. But sometimes it's very, very subtle and it's communicated in ways, sometimes it goes under the radar, but people actually do feel it. Okay, so I just want us to look at that list for a moment. It's a list that's very, we know about it: disability, man, woman, youth, working class, gay, lesbian, transgender, maternity and pregnancy. And I just want us to look at the list and then look at this, and then just to take note of how you feel when you see it. So we see disability, man, woman, youth, and so forth and so forth. But the minute that something, one word is added, it causes in many people a reaction. And quite often it's a negative reaction, it's a jarring action. And people quite often don't want to talk about some of the difficulties that they may experience. And as I said, as I'm saying, that things become more complicated the moment that that word or the ethnicity or the culture is added towards the words that we've used to describe. It's quite interesting actually, because at the minute, there's very, very little research done on injustice and health. Very, very little research indeed. So we have to read between the lines to understand what happens to individuals when they've either been discriminated against or there's a sense of injustice. And these are some of the things that people experience when they've experienced any form of injustice. So quite often there's a regression or to early painful memories. Quite often there's disbelief, shortness of breath in terms of people can't believe it. There's panic, there's shock, and I'll let you read the rest, but these are some of the emotions that people feel. And as much as we're talking about mental health today, and we need to, one of the things I want us to always remember that we're not compartmentalized as human beings. We are interconnected. The compartmentalization of humanity is more of a Western idea, but people in other parts of the world, Caribbean, Africa, Asia, they understand the human beings as an integrated whole. And I think more and more doctors now are beginning to understand that actually we are all interconnected, and we're not just bits kind of cut off and chopped off in different places. So, but there's two emotions I want to really kind of look at today. One in particular is anger. When there's been a sense of injustice, there's also a sense of anger and rage and outrage. And I think what I wanted to say to us that racial injustice affects our whole humanity. The integumentary system is to do with the skin, the nails. The skin is the protection to the external world. But if we're under lots of stress, it'll have major impact on what happens to our skin, which actually helps us to kind of keep us healthy. There's a skeletal system, muscular system, the nervous system, the endocrine system, and all the systems that we have in our bodies are affected by racial injustice. There's an impact to our humanity, and there's a reaction to what takes place, and quite often within us, and quite often people don't talk about it. And sometimes when people do talk about it, they're not seen or heard. And that can set off things like paranoia, disbelief, and so forth. And it's really important, as I say towards the end, that we really need to find people that we can talk to. Okay, so in terms of when I do any of my talks, when we talk about the effect on people, I talk about the whole humanity. Some of you may have seen this slide before in various ways when I've done other things. Recently, I listened to Radio 4, where psychologists were going to do some research on the impact, the psychological and emotional impact on frontline workers in COVID-19. And I remember saying to some friends, that is too narrow, because that impact, that trauma has affected the entire humanity. So we've got bio, psychosocial, spiritual, and sexual. And I'll just say my bit now, and certainly we'll have some time later on for Q&A. So the bio is to do with the body, the physiology, the endocrine system, the blood system, the respiratory system. So what happens when we're under stress, we've been violated, there's a massive impact on our bodies. That's interconnected to the psychosocial, what happens to our mind, relationships, how they're interconnected, and that is affected by injustice. Spiritual, when we have been traumatized, or racial trauma, the whole thing being traumatized due to our humanity, how we view the world shifts. There's a disbelief of your existence and where you really fit in the world, and it's really disorientating. So spiritual doesn't necessarily mean God, or though it can do, but actually means how then do you understand the world now that this has happened to you? And this whole thing around sexual, it's to do with intimacy and relationships. So what can happen when people have been traumatized, experience racial injustice? Now, it could be that you're in a relationship, and when you are, when you've been traumatized, or there's some infraction against you, what you want to be held, you want to be hugged, you want closeness, you want intimacy. But you could be with somebody that when they experience those things, they withdraw, they come into themselves, and that's their way of dealing with it. And you can imagine what can happen into a relationship if one wants closeness and intimacy, but the other one wants to withdraw. That is the time when sometimes affairs can take place, illicit relationships, and things that individuals wouldn't normally do, they find themselves doing for comfort during difficult times. Okay, so the effects of racial, of anger. So the whole thing about injustice, of course, that when there's been injustice against us, there is one of anger. And you've got two pictures here. You've got the one on the left and the one on the right. The one on the left is possibly safer because you know how he or she feels. The danger is the one on the right, who is not saying much, but bottles it up. And one of the symptoms of racial injustice can be, also injustice, is violent outrage. And what happens is this: the one on the left is expressing himself, or she's expressing themselves, or a child is expressing themselves of what's taking place. So you kind of know where they are. With this person here who says they're all right, what happens, they're bottling this up, and at some point, quite often, there's an explosion. And certainly culturally, where men are taught to suppress their emotions, what happens, there can be flashpoints, and something happens really incidental or insignificant, and there's a massive explosion, and we want to know why certain things have happened. And it could be that in terms of racial injustice, they've been suppressing how they've been feeling for weeks and months, what's happening in the workplace. They're not saying much at home, they're not saying much to their friends, but it's grinding them down, and at some point there's an explosion, and then there's well, all hell breaks loose, damaged relationships, they can smash things up and so forth. So on the left is better, on the right, that person needs to have an eye kept on them. Okay, so this is a real snapshot. So what must we do to remain healthy? So racial injustice is a violation of our humanity, and when people feel that they've been ostracized or undermined and it's carried on for some time, it really does affect who they are. And part of the difficulty sometimes, or one of the difficulties I should say, if you're the only person of color on your staff, who do you talk to? Who do you trust? Who's willing to really hear what you're saying? It can be really, really difficult. So what must we do to remain healthy? The previous person spoke about church and so forth, but these are a few things that we must do to remain healthy. Okay, so let me just, right, so there's 6 doctors we need to visit. Now, this is just basic stuff, but it's really important, and I'll say a few more in a bit. And all these things that I'm suggesting will not take away the impact, but it will minimize the effect it has on you. So when we experience something which disorientates us, there will be an effect. But some of the things that we do can help mitigate or diminish the impact it will actually have on us. So fresh air is incredibly important. That kind of goes without saying. Being able to get out into the open, even if you don't feel like it, get out into the open, really important. Exercise, that's really important as well in terms of keeping our mind, well, not just keeping our minds, but actually the chemical processes that takes place in our bodies when we're exercising helps to mitigate or diminish some of the stressor hormones that's been flying around in our system. Water, we know the whole thing about keeping dehydrated. And these things, I've got to say, is this: when we're under stress, these are the things that fall off the wagon. And that's part of the reason why we become so unwell so quickly, because the very things that we should be taking heed to in terms of looking after ourselves, because we're so stressed and we're not thinking properly, chemicals are thrown around our head and we've got brain fog and all the rest of it. And we don't do the things that we should do to keep ourselves healthy. So drinking lots of water, keeping hydrated, really important. Rest is absolutely important. It talks about the 7 types of rest that we need, getting away from the situation. There's a friend of mine, even though this is not her situation, not racial injustice, but she's having to care for a father. And on Saturday, she went out for a meal with a friend. And sometimes when we're having these difficult moments, just that meal with a friend away from the house in a different environment can be something that's really soothing and healing for us. I think a whole lecture could be done on diet and food. And one of the things that I say to folks, when we're under stress, the 3 things that we really do need the most is exercise, rest, and diet. Diet is incredibly important. Certainly there's an emerging field of looking at diet and mental health. And you would have thought they would have thought about that years ago, but diet is really important. And what I would say to individuals, when you're under stress, you might lose your appetite, but at least try to eat something. And during that time, if you can eat some raw food each day, it's really helpful for those micronutrients to help keep our body strong during the difficult time. And sunshine, incredibly important for our well-being. And you might say, Delroy, this is England. Yeah, I know, but sunshine, get out when you can, really important. Here's a few more things I'd like to share with you as well. One of the things that we don't do very well, we're too busy. And certainly from a Pentecostal tradition, we're just busy, and very, very noisy. But one of the things that's really helpful is stillness and meditation. For those of us from a church background, one of the things that really helps us during these times are spiritual disciplines. I can't talk about that enough. Spiritual disciplines, prayer we know about, but sometimes all we do with prayer, we pray, do our thing, say it, and then we rush off. But how about praying and waiting? Meditation, contemplating, journaling, Bible study, the whole thing about stillness. 2 things about spiritual disciplines. It is about getting closer to God, yes, but what spiritual disciplines do, it slows us down. And one of the things that helps us to slow down is stillness. In terms of the racial justice and the impact on our brain, the hippocampus and the amygdala that controls emotions and so forth. And the amygdala is there for controlling anger and kind of response to fear. And what happens if we're in a heightened state all the time, as we will be if we are racially abused or racially discriminated against, the amygdala never switches off. So we're in this constant state of hypervigilance. But one of the things that we can do to close it down is stillness and deep breathing, which is a part of meditation. If you look at lots of spiritual disciplines, one of the things that they do focus on is the breath, how important it is to take deep breaths to slow down. In fact, this is not even a part of my talk this evening, but some of you may know.
We are going to have to we're going to have to stop in the next minute. Sorry, we've been trying to message, but yeah, please finish that point, and then we're going to move on. Thank you.
Okay. Well, right. Okay. Fair enough. That's fine. Tell you what, let me finish there. I'll just finish with the whole thing about boxed breathing, taught by the Navy SEALs. They know if you slow the breathing down, your heart rate is controlled, your breathing is, and your blood pressure goes down, so you can think. You can think rationally in very stressful moments. So the whole thing around deep breathing is really important for us. I'm going to finish there.
Thank you so much. What a powerful presentation. And for our audience, you'll have an opportunity to ask your questions in the chat to Dr. Delroy. So now we're going to move on to our next item, and I'm going to hand over to our co-host, Israel. Over to you, Israel.
Thank you, Shermara. What a powerful stuff from Bishop Delroy Hall. There's just so many things to unpack there that I'm sure we will, hopefully with time. Now, I have the pleasure to introduce one of my friends who I'm just going to interview briefly around some of the stuff he's doing. This is in the person of Rev Cassius Francis. Is a minister within the Wesleyan Holiness Church, and is also a bereavement support person within a charity called Loss and Hope, which is a coalition project that equips churches in bereavement. Reverend Cassius is also studying at Queen's Foundation at Nazarene Theological College, doing an MA in theology at the moment. So welcome, Reverend Cassius. It's good to have you with us tonight.
Thanks for having me, Israel. It's good to be here.
Good, good. Now, something I'm aware you do, which some people on this platform are involved in, is there's something that happened this year in March, a National Service of Reflection. Can you just say more about that for people to understand what that is? Because I think it's important to the conversation we're having.
Yeah, sure. The National Day of Reflection is something that is hosted by the Marie Curie charity, and it is a day that's organized to mark the first day of lockdown in 2020. So there are a number of activities that take place on the 23rd of March. And earlier this year, just felt that it was important to do something specifically for Black communities to recognize the importance of having a safe space for people to come together and to reflect on those that we have lost over the course of the pandemic, whether that has been through COVID or by other means. Just really recognizing the importance of that. So yeah, really encouraged that Dr. Delroy, who just spoke, actually helped us to put together the framework for that service. Bishop Mike Royal was our speaker. But we were also really blessed to have community partners. The Majonzi Fund meant that we were able to invite Patrick Vernon to speak at that service, and also the Abele Initiative based in London. Yvonne Field, who heads that organization, came, and they were a huge support in helping us to develop that service.
Thank you very much. Yeah, such a powerful service. Thank you. And I wanted a follow-up question is, what will you say is the impact of that service on people, those who attended and those who might have watched it online? And I think we've just put it in the chat for people to be able to catch up on the highlight of that service, because it's quite powerful. What will you say is the impact on the community of such a service?
Yeah, some of the feedback that we have had really indicated that people felt that it was a place where they were able to remember their loved ones. You know, we have to recognize over the course of the pandemic, and you know, my own grandmother died last year. We were in a sense fortunate as a family, even though the lead up to her death was quite traumatic. She was in hospital, and we went through the whole situation of not being able to see her, not being able to communicate with her directly. We as a family were able to have the funeral that we wanted for our grandmother. You know, at that time, everyone was able to gather. But for many families, they didn't have that opportunity. Many families, particularly in Black communities, when we are used to large funerals, you know, would have had to have funerals with reduced numbers, not the plan that they would have had for their loved one. And so people, I think, really valued just the opportunity to come together. So we are planning our service for next year, again on the 23rd of March, just recognizing that there are still people who are needing a space to be able to reflect and to come together. But also some people still don't feel comfortable about coming out. So it will be available online as the service was earlier this year, and the link that's been provided.
Thank you. Thank you. And yeah, people can watch the link, can click on the link to watch the highlights of the service, as we've said, is in the chat. A third and possibly a last question. This is one thing that you do, you know, organizing this service with different organizations and people, but also you are a bereavement support person. And I think it'd be important to tease out more what you do in that space with loss and hope, and what, you know, how you support people who are going through bereavement. How does that happen? Can you just talk to us about that a bit more?
Yeah, sure. So first and foremost, I'm on this forum as a minister with the Wesleyan Holiness Church. It was us that helped pull together the service of reflection, as you highlighted. My work around bereavement support, actually some of it relates to what's already been shared really eloquently by Rachael and Dr. Delroy. Firstly, Rachael talked about training. And so part of my role now through the organization Loss and Hope is to provide training for churches to think about how they can effectively or more effectively support bereaved people. So that's one of the things that I do. But I would also say, just in relation to the broader theme around racial injustice and mental health, bereavement, we recognize, unless people are given the space to grieve in healthy ways, you know, the issues can turn into significant mental health issues. And that's something that we really work to try and support people to avoid, so that people can get the help that they need. And we really feel that our churches are well placed to provide support, to provide places of safety and places of welcome, again, I think, as Rachael referred to, so that they are, you know, they are supported to grieve in healthy ways. We're also part, I should say, lastly, Israel, of a wider organization called At a Loss. Atalos.org is the national signposting bereavement organization. It is a charity that works right across the UK, and anybody who is needing to access further bereavement support can log onto that website and find relevant support in their local community. I will, thank you. Jess has already done that.
Chat. Yeah,
far quicker than me. Yeah, Jess has posted the link in the chat so that if others want to find the details, they can do that.
Thank you so much, Reverend Cassius. We could have more questions that we could explore with you, but because of time, we'll leave it there. But thank you very much for the things that you are doing in the community. God bless you. So we're gonna move to the next and sort of final section of tonight's webinar, and that is sort of having a panel discussion, which means this is now the opportunity for people to pose their questions to Rachael. I think we have other people on the panel. We have Bishop Mike Royal, who is the CTE General Director, and also a bishop within Apostolic Pastoral Congress. We also have Patrick Regan. I think Patrick is also joining. Patrick is the CEO of Kintsugi Hope. And we also have Titilola Balogun, who works with me at the One People Commission. Titilola is the coordinator of One People Commission, but she's also a grief recovery specialist. So if we highlight Titilola as well, we have these 4 panelists. And Shermara and I, we're gonna pose questions to them that you guys have been putting in the chat. So Shermara, do you wanna go first?
Yes, we also have Dr. Delroy Hall on that panel as well. So if we could pin Dr. Delroy. Okay,
Yes.
thank you. So one of the questions that we have, we'll go to you first, Rachael. You spoke about the discrepancy between physical and mental health and how they are viewed differently. Why is this? And what can you offer to the audience this evening? We are asking for responses to be the maximum 2 minutes. Thank you.
Well, I think part of it is because actually with physical health, we are able to see exactly what's going on, and the medical profession generally know what's happening. So if you have a broken leg, they know exactly what you can do to fix it, and that's kind of sorted, and that's great. It might hurt, it will take a while, but there's really clear evidence-based ways to fix things. Actually, where we are with kind of mental health is we know a lot less about how the mind works. And we can't see if somebody's ill just by looking at them. They don't have a cast. And also sometimes people's mental illnesses can affect their behavior. And so it can behaviors can be tricky to face when people are really distressed. And I think it's really important that we're just able to be as honest as possible, and that we're talking from the front in churches about the existence of mental illness, and bringing that to God in prayer.
Absolutely powerful. Thank you so much for that, Rachael. I have another question before handing over to Israel as well. So this is for you, Dr. Delroy. Do you think there is a stigma towards speaking about mental health in UK MEC communities? And if so, why?
Yeah, gosh, why? 2 minutes, I've lost 20 seconds already. Yeah, I think there is. Part is to do with cultural understanding. I think part is to do with quite often having a literal view of the Bible. So very little is understood about the context and so forth, and how people may have understood things that particular day. And I think who's preaching as well, if they haven't been informed, they will just repeat how what they know. So if there's still a belief that somebody with mental illness, and certainly, certainly from some traditions, because you're filled with the Spirit, why should you be depressed? That doesn't happen. So I think it depends on the organization, who's leading the congregation, and a lot of culture as well, and sometimes not kind of looking to the scriptures deeper than what we see on the page. That's my kind of short answer.
Thank you. That's great. Over to you, Israel.
Thanks, Shermara. Patrick, let me come to you. Sort of with a question. I mean, there's been some acknowledgement in some of the talks tonight that even within churches, there is still that stigma attached to mental health issues. As a Christian leader who is leading Kintsugi, how do you think we can help churches and church leaders so that we can be more open to talk about mental health issues at church? So that's one. And then the other is equally conversations around racial justice is difficult to have in church. As someone who has done a lot of work in Southeast London with your previous role with XLP, how will you suggest people begin to tackle some of these issues in the church as well? Patrick.
Hey, thank you ever so much, Israel. Yeah, good evening, everyone. I think for me, it's about modeling courage and vulnerability as leaders. I struggle with my mental health. It's not something that is in the past for me. It's something I have to manage. I think I've managed it quite well, but I still have to manage it, and I can have bad days. And I think so often when we talk about things, we always talk about it like 20 years ago when I was struggling with this. And I think we need a more to model. You know, it's interesting what people are looking for in leaders is three things: passion, humility, and integrity. And I think if we can model that as leaders, that is really, really important. In terms of work I did in Peckham, is I realised people said to me when I started XLP, it would never work as a white guy. A white guy running a charity in Peckham, leading the charity, it would never work. And a lot of things happened, to be honest. And one was I think as a white guy working in, I had to be really aware of my privileges, my biases. Needed to educate myself. I need to recognize my own privilege. I needed to use privilege to speak up for others. And to do nothing when you're faced with racism is a decision. And I was really fortunate. I got a guy called Les Isaac who mentored me. Many of you will know him. He's the CEO of Street Pastors. And one of the things he did, he took me to Trenchtown in Jamaica. He took me to Cape Coast in Ghana. He took his mentoring really seriously. And I remember there was this one night in the middle of Trenchtown that he asked me to speak. And I said, why are you asking me to speak? And he was like, because they're all waiting to see what the white boy's got to say. And I was like, what do you mean? And he's going, they worked out you're not pleased, but they're fascinated to see what the white boy's got to say. Because he said this changed my life actually. He said, because you white boys, sometimes you come to places like this and you go to your nice churches and your TV stations. They're fascinated to see what the white boy's got to say. And I said, but Les, I don't feel adequate. I don't feel like I can do anything. I can't contribute anything. And he said to me, you know what, Patrick, the colour of your skin is really, really important. Your identity is really important. Your history is really important. Your family is really important. But the condition of your heart is even more important. And you have an amazing ability to connect with people's hearts. And so you need to get up there. And I think that's the approach we always took in XLPs. How do we create safe places? How do we connect? Brené Brown says this, is really interesting. She said, we have to dispel the myth that empathy is walking in someone else's shoes. You can't walk in someone else's shoes. It's their shoes. But what you can do is you can listen to them about what it's like to walk in their shoes. And this is the key, she says, and believe them when they tell you the story of what it's like to work in their shoes. And I think that is what empathy is.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Bishop Mike, a question for you, and perhaps Titilola as well. It'd be good to hear from the two of you. The Black community are experiencing grief and trauma at a huge level. How do we work that journey together? So if we have Bishop Mike first and then Titilola.
Yeah, I think it's really important that we acknowledge the grief that the Black community experience. And one of the things I find, and you know, I've been a mental health chaplain now for 14 years. I see the revolving door of Black men coming through and the mental health system into the secure estate and then out and then back in. But one of the things we need to do is encourage people to talk and actually to grieve. When I've spent time, I'm married into a Ghanaian family, and one of the things that's very powerful about West Africa, I see, is that when they grieve really well. In fact, actually, at funerals, there is a whole series of meetings that people will go through to deal with their grief and get it out there in the open. I think the challenge is that in a European context, that doesn't always happen. And so oftentimes there can be this underlying grief. And secondly, I think the big issue is that there can be trauma that triggers grief as well. So you see the shooting of Chris Carber at the hands of the Metropolitan Police. If someone in your family has experienced violence at the hands of the police or death in custody, that re-triggers your experience. And so Black people are re-traumatized. So the importance of us finding safe, informal spaces to talk about that stuff and to get that out is, for me, really essential.
Thank you very much, Bishop. And Titilola, as a grief recovery specialist, how will you tackle that question?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. So I suppose for me, it would be building trust and confidence within our communities. I think within the Black African communities, there's a lot of lack of trust going on in there. So for instance, a Black person who is going through grief or trauma would rather speak to someone who is not from the same community with them, because they are afraid or scared and worried that this discussion would go beyond the room. So we need to learn, either as a practitioner, to begin to practice exactly how to be confidential in the approach that we use as Black practitioners. And also on the other side, help to build trust and confidentiality with the clients that we deal with. I suppose also it's been mentioned here, but just to reemphasize that it's okay not to be okay. The society teaches us that it's otherwise, but it's really okay. And again, for the Black community, you know, boys can't be heard crying or men can't hear. They're not allowed to show their emotions, but grief does not have any sexuality. Grief is neither female nor male. If you're sad, you're sad. So it doesn't matter if you're female or if you're not. If you're hurting and if you're aching, it doesn't matter what sex you are. You've just got to still express yourself, and it's definitely okay not to be okay. On the other end, the last thing I'd like to mention also very quickly is training and education. That's so important. There needs to be a lot of practitioners out there, specialists out there helping people to go through this, because yes, one of the speakers said earlier on, if I fall, and I think it was Rachel who made that point, if I fall down, I break my arm, it's obvious that I broke my arm. But if I have a broken heart, if I've lost a car, if I've had an accident, if I've lost a job, you wouldn't see it on my face, but it's in my heart and it's in there. And if I don't speak up, you know, no one's going to know about it. So speaking up definitely is so important. And the reason we have a lot of actions going out there, a lot of strife, a lot of demonstrations, peaceful and sometimes, you know, not peaceful, is because people need to be heard. And so we always say that grievers don't need to be fixed. If I'm grieving, you don't need to fix me because you can't fix me. I just need to be heard. I need someone to hear what I'm going through. I need to voice that out. So we need to, again, create the space so that people can express themselves, and it's a safe place where they can just continually do this. So within the churches, it's very important that we have a safe space where members of a church can express themselves without just using the scriptures to shut them down. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Titilola. Shermara, next question.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So we've got two questions that have come through. The first one is, when assessing or diagnosing a problem, you always have to look at the cause and the effect. We've looked a lot at the effect of racism, its impact on the Black community. So we have a question about the perpetrators, the cause. Is there a mental health issue going on there? And we open that to the panel, to anyone that wants to address that. Dr. Delroy, you look like you
yeah, it's an interesting question, actually, because I've struggled. Yes, when I was doing my research, but then I've had to step back a bit. I've just put down the level of gratuitous violence that was really expended on Black bodies. What human does that? And then I said, well, I see it as a form of mental illness. And then I thought, no, that's being disrespectful to people who really are mentally ill. I don't know. I think I've concluded that, okay, we're in the time of EDI, equality, diversity, inclusion, all the rest of it. And I'm not too sure at the moment. I think some of the stuff that goes on is unconscious. Some of it is conscious and intentional. I'm not too sure where I sit at the moment. But I will say this. One of the things that a client said to me many years ago when I first started training as a psychotherapist, he said, Delroy, the root of all prejudice is fear. And I will finish with this. I hear mainly white people saying about this whole thing about EDI, they don't want to say things, they fear getting it wrong. And as a psychotherapist, the word fear is very interesting. we only fear something. Well, if you're in a car and your brakes fail, you do fear, that's quite right. But we only fear if something's going to harm us or annihilate us. And I wonder at an unconscious level, if somebody doesn't look or sound like me, there is a fear that they may harm or annihilate me. So then I won't engage with them because I perceive them as a threat. Whether it's a mental illness, I'm not sure, but I think fear is going on at some level.
Thank you for that. That's really powerful, and I think it's something we need to reflect on. Yes, we look at those who are impacted, but those who are perpetrating, systems that are perpetrating, needs to be dealt with as well. Thank you. Another question that has come through is, my friends and family don't talk very honestly about what's going on for them. How can I encourage more honesty with them in relation to their mental health and speaking about it? And we'll direct that one to Bishop Mike.
Yeah, I think it's about creating kind of informal safe spaces. That can be kind of going out with a friend for a drink. It could be having a meal together or a coffee. It could be sitting round the kitchen table. One of the charities I lead, they do something called kitchen table talks, where families are able to talk about the trauma that's going on. Perhaps their children are struggling in school, or perhaps the family is struggling in their relationship, or perhaps the children are getting involved in youth violence. And those kitchen table talks enable conversations to go on in a safe space, but with a clear understanding that no one is going to judge you, but also that conversation is not going to go any further. And I think Titilola spoke earlier about that importance of conversations being confidential. So I think just encouraging those conversations, and certainly kind of in the mental health trust that I work in Birmingham and Solihull here in the UK, we create for actually both staff and service users time where it's time to talk, and people can come to a safe space and talk. And that would be my encouragement.
Shermara, I don't know if I could just mention, pick up on something that Rachael said in her talk. She talked about at the end around this little phrase, which I think is really beautiful, that we're called to be a gentle presence. And I quite like that, because I think that sometimes we feel like we need to be mental health experts to be able to understand people. But in a gentle presence is, I can't be a mental health expert, but I can take my friend for coffee. I might be able to attend a doctor's appointment or something. And looking around us and saying, what can I practically do to be a gentle presence in people's lives? A lot of people don't want to be fixed. They don't want to be judged. They don't want to be rescued. But a gentle presence is something we can all be. Every single person in this call can be a gentle presence in someone else's life.
Can I just thank you, Patrick, for the saying that. If I can just add, one of the things I've seen over many years in the Mental Health Trust, I always say this, is that the guys who come out from a secure estate and have a supported, loving family are the guys who tend to stay in the community. The guys who don't have that are the guys that are the revolving door. They're in and they're out. And I think that the point that Patrick kind of made there is so important. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And before handing over to Israel, another question has come through, which says, can you advise how we can navigate social media in a way that has positive rather than adverse effects on our mental health? That's a very big one. But we're still asking for 1 minute response. So Rachael, maybe you can do that one.
I think it's about us remembering why we all got excited about social media in the first place. And that was to connect with people we know, but also to kind of be a part of new communities about stuff we're liking. So actually, if being part of it might be that actually taking care of yourself in the mental health space in social media, during particular periods of time, is muting the news and muting things that are too distressing to watch, and being self-aware enough to know that actually I can't cope with that. That doesn't mean we're shutting ourselves off to it completely, but it means that we're not having to face everyone's social comment. We might be able to get the news from news sources, but not the social commentary. And making sure that actually our social media we're part of communities, and we're modeling what it looks like to be appropriately vulnerable with who we are, depending on the situation we're in. But modeling what it means to be kind. Rather, so often we hear "be kind" from people who are being the exact opposite. And actually, I think modeling that is far more powerful and transformative than preaching it in this case.
So look at our time is going and it's fast spent. So perhaps the last question as we wrap up the panel conversation in that sense. So there's one here. In fact, there's a few more questions. So apologies if we didn't pick up on your question. It's just we're sifting through them. Bishop Delroy, perhaps we come to you with this. Culture plays a massive role in the Black church. So how do we manage cultural beliefs versus biblical doctrines about illness causation in the Black majority church? You are the Black theologian, or one of the
I think I spent 30 years trying to do that.
Bishop Mike can answer this as well, Reverend Cassius.
Yeah, it's really difficult to disentangle culture, because what happens over a period of time, culture is then theologized. And if you're raised in that culture, then you don't know what's theology and you don't know what's culture. And then what people will do, they'll find half a verse or verse in the Bible, which will prove their point. So it's really, really difficult. But I do think what's really important, and I'll push it, the leadership has to be educated. I can't see another way around it. I think the stats when I did my PhD years ago was less than 0.5% of Black clergy were educated. Now that's a major crisis when we consider so many of us go to church, and you've got leadership quite often that hasn't been certainly educated theologically, even to understand things theological. How do you separate culture? I think it's a difficult thing. I don't think it's, well, it's not just the Black majority church. I think they had that problem with with the missionaries in the 18th century when they went to Africa and the Caribbean. There was still this kind of this fusion of culture and theology. So I just don't think it's easy. But I think the leadership has to be educated. I can't see another way.
Just very, very quickly from me, as a chaplain, when we look at spirituality, and we have a kind of like a bit of a traffic light system, really. Green is where someone's spirituality is good, and engaging with it is going to help them to get better. Or amber is where sometimes people's spirituality is just dry, it's gone. And actually, we need to work with that person to rediscover their spirituality. And red is where actually it's mixed up perhaps with psychosis and different issues that need to be treated medically. And then we have to really tread carefully. And I would just offer that to you and offer that to people as a general way of just assessing kind of where people are at in terms kind of how they deal with their spirituality, how they deal with their faith and the Bible. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bishop Microaggressions and Bishop Delroy Hall. I think this is a good place to end. So just wanted to say thank you to all our panelists, to Titilola, to Patrick, to Bishop Delroy, to Rachael, to Bishop Microaggressions, to Reverend Cassius Francis. Thank you very much, everyone, for contributing. This has been brought together, as I said at the start, by One People Commission of the Evangelical Alliance, Churches Together in England, and Kintsugi Hope. So it's been a collaborative effort of 3 different organizations working together in partnership. Shermara, any final words as we sum up tonight?
Yes, again, we just want to thank you all for giving up your evening for this important discussion. We pray that it doesn't just lead to more inertia or lack of action, but that it drives us and propels us forward. Also, for some of you, we'll be asking, what next? What's the action? Is this just a talking shop? But actually, we're building intellectual infrastructure here. We're building structures to move us forward, and we have to discuss and bring different minds together. So we're so glad that you've been a collaborative mind this evening. So thank you all again for your time. I think we're going to need to do this again. We might need to talk to all the partners, but thank you again and good evening.